So we're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 9 this morning and picking up the thread of this advice that we've been looking at from the teacher with our passage there. So Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and starting at verse 1. This too I carefully explored. Even though the action of the godly and wise people are in God's hands, no one knows whether God will show them favor. The same destiny ultimately awaits everyone, whether righteous or wicked, good or bad, ceremonially clean or unclean, religious or irreligious. Good people receive the same treatment as sinners, and people who make promises to God are treated like people who don't. It seems so tragic that everyone under the sun suffers the same fate. That is why people are not more careful to be good. Instead, they choose their own mad course, for they have no hope. There is nothing ahead but death anyway. There is hope only for the living. As they say, it's better to be a live dog than a dead lion. The living at least know they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, nor are they remembered. Whatever they did in their lifetime, loving, hating, envying, it's all long gone. They no longer play a part in anything here on earth. So go ahead, eat your food with joy and drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. Live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God has given you is your reward for all your earthly toil. Whatever you do, do well. For when you go to the grave, there will be no work or planning or knowledge or wisdom. I've observed something else under the sun. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race, and the strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle. The wise sometimes go hungry, and the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. And those who are educated don't always lead successful lives. It's all decided by chance, by being in the right place at the right time. People can never predict when hard times might come. Like fish in a net or birds in a trap, people are caught by sudden tragedy. May the Lord open his word to our hearts. So, I don't know if you're fully awake, but if you caught the flow of that passage at the beginning, he lists kind of opposite extremes. And so the teacher starts off by saying, this too I carefully explored. And remember, we've been looking at these passages and we've understood that the teacher is a guy who's lived some life. Like he's learned some lessons and he's imparting lessons about wisdom to us. Like this is a good way to look at life. Here's some advice about how to go about things wisely. And so he says, this is something I carefully explored. Like he's not just popping off the top of his head, but he's thought through about what he's about to say to us. And so he speaks to his audience in Israel, but also through Scripture to us. And so he says, this too I carefully explored. Even though the actions of godly and wise people are in God's hands, no one knows whether God will show them favor. And then he says, the same destiny ultimately awaits everyone, whether they're righteous or wicked, good or bad, ceremonially clean or unclean, religious or irreligious. Good people receive the same treatment as sinners. People who make promises to God are treated like people who don't. And that doesn't sound like a good message to give you, does it? It sounds like something that if we think about it, we might think it's true, but we don't think it should be true. If we're righteous, if we're good, if we, when it speaks of ceremonially clean or unclean, it's talking about keeping kind of the rituals of the temple, and symbolically they would do stuff to say, like, my conscience is clear, my heart's clean. And so the teacher is saying, whether you're righteous, whether you're good, whether you go with a clean conscience to worship, or whether you've got an unclean conscience, that you've done stuff that you know is wrong, whether you're religious or you're not religious, whether you're good people or whether you go around sinning, or whether you make promises to God or you don't make promises to God, the same fate is everyone's. Nobody knows if God will show them favor. The same destiny ultimately awaits everyone, whether they're one thing or the other. That doesn't sound like the kind of thing that preachers should preach to you, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're good or bad. Doesn't matter if you do the right thing or the wrong thing. Doesn't matter if you're religious, if you go to church and you do those things, or if you don't. Either way, your destiny is the same. But that seems to be what he's saying, that people who make promises to God are treated like people who don't. That in life, there isn't kind of a fairness to how things work out. That good people sometimes suffer in spite of being good, sometimes even suffer because they do the right thing. And we would like to be able to do the right thing and get the right results, and we kind of resent it when it doesn't work out that way, right? We get upset if things aren't fair. But he's saying that's how the world works, that it's not always fair. Good people don't always get rewards for doing the right things. Bad people don't always get the punishment for doing the wrong things. And so sometimes the world is like that. And he says that's the kind of world we live in. And so it's not a surprise that when he comes to, he says that, that's the way it is and that's the destiny. And so then that's verses 1 and 2. But in verse 3 he says, it seems so wrong that everyone under the sun suffers the same fate. Like everybody gets the same treatment, and it seems wrong. But if you've lived very long, even if you don't think it should be true, even if you don't think it's good that it's true, you kind of know that it's true, right? That sometimes you can do what you're supposed to do, and things don't work out right for you. Isn't that true? You walk around the world and you try to follow the rules and you try to do the right things, and when things don't play out right, you say, well, that's not fair, that's not right, it shouldn't be that way. The world we live in is flawed in that way, that it's not fair. And the same destiny shouldn't await everyone, and it shouldn't be the way it is. And so we'd have the same response that the teacher has. He says, it seems so tragic that everyone under the sun suffers the same fate. That sometimes good people have things work out for them, and sometimes things don't work out for good people. And sometimes bad people have things work out for them, and sometimes it doesn't work out for them. So there's not really a correlation between doing the right thing and getting the right result. And when we face that, we can get bent out of shape about it. We can say it's not fair. We can wonder what's going on. We can even question where God is when that's happening. But we know the world we live in kind of operates according to those rules. And we know that sometimes things have not played out even when we're doing our very best to do the right thing. And other times we've looked at somebody and said, I don't know how that lady, that guy gets ahead, but somehow, even though they're doing it all wrong, they seem to get away with murder. Like they do the wrong thing all the time, and it never seems to catch up to them. And here I am trying so hard, and it doesn't always play out. And so the teacher goes on, he says, that's why people are not more careful to be good. Like the fact that the world's not fair, the fact that you don't always get rewarded for doing the right thing or punished for doing the wrong thing, he said that's why people aren't careful to be good. Because if they knew being good, you got rewarded and God blessed you, and if you knew doing the wrong thing, God wouldn't reward you and you wouldn't get blessed and you'd be punished for it, then maybe more people would be good. But he says that's why people aren't more careful to be good, because they know it doesn't always work out that way. Instead, they choose their own mad course, the teacher tells us, for they have no hope. There's nothing ahead but death anyway. Everybody lives, everybody dies. Everybody walks around the world, and sometimes things work out, and sometimes things don't. And it seems kind of random. And he says, because they don't have a hope of things being fair, they go ahead and just choose whatever they want to do. And they choose their own mad course. And it might be madness, but, there's no rules anyway, it seems. Not only do they choose their own course, and not only does it not seem fair, but it seems like ultimately they have no impact. What they do will be forgotten. And so the teacher says, the living at least know they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, nor are they remembered. Whatever they did in their lifetime, loving, hating, envying, is all long gone. They no longer play a part in anything here on earth. He says, in the end, we're all going to die, and people are probably going to forget who you were and what you're about. He's a really cheery guy, right? We've already learned that through the last few weeks. So he says it's all unfair, and it's all chaotic, and it doesn't work out the way that it should. And so he offers some advice, and he says, so because of this hopeless situation, and you'd expect his attitude would be like, don't even bother, don't even try, no use in trying, it's not going to be fair anyway. Like, don't try to be good, there's no reward in it, like there's no payoff. You would think he would be kind of throwing his hands up in the air, but when he offers his advice, because the world's unfair, because of this hopeless situation we live in, so what you should do is this. And so he says, so go ahead, eat your food with joy, and drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. Live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of your life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God gives you is your reward for all your earthly toil. Whatever you do, do well, for when you go to the grave, there will be no work or planning or knowledge or wisdom. He says, because the world's unfair, because things don't work out always the right way, because you can do the right thing and get the wrong result, or do the wrong thing and things work out anyway, go ahead and be happy. And drink your wine with joy, or eat your food with joy, and drink your wine with a happy heart. And he tells us God approves of that, and wear fine clothes, and live happily with the woman you love. Like don't worry, be happy, because nothing out there is fair, and sometimes you're going to get a raw deal, and it doesn't always work out that the good get rewarded and the bad get punished, so have a good time. Doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't really follow. And even if that's the advice he's given us, we'd go, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I walk around in a world that's unfair, that sometimes really treats me ill, where I can't really figure things out, and I sometimes it's so not good. How do I walk around and be happy? And how do I enjoy my life? And how do I just enjoy a good relationship with my spouse? And how do I just, go ahead and do that when everything is not fair? Well, let's set that aside for a minute and kind of stew in that question as we move on to the next section. And we'll set it aside and we'll come back to it. But the teacher says then, I have observed something else under the sun. The fastest runner doesn't always win the race. The strongest warrior doesn't always win the battle. The wise sometimes go hungry, and the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. And those who are educated don't always lead successful lives. Now, there's a principle there that we may find even harder to accept than the fact that the world isn't fair. Not only is the world not fair, but it's not even predictable. Right? He says the fastest runner doesn't always win the race. We would think that the world operates according to certain principles, and so if we had to choose who's going to win the race, we'd say, well, the fastest runner wins the race. Well, who's going to win the battle? The strongest warrior, of course. Who's going to figure out a way not to go hungry? Well, that's going to be the wise man, because he's going to figure something out. He's going to come up with a plan. Actually, it doesn't say wise man. It just says the wise. Women are wise too. And the skillful are not necessarily wealthy. Like even if you've got some skills, you might not be successful in financially. Then he says, the educated don't always lead successful lives. Like, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how skilled you are, how educated you are. It doesn't matter whether you really are the fastest runner or the greatest warrior, sometimes you can come out on the bottom anyway. Sometimes you don't know who's going to win and who's going to be successful. And so he says, even worse than the fact that it's not fair is that you can't even figure out the rules to play by. Like, it's one thing to say, if I do the right thing, I don't get rewarded. But what if I'm willing to cut a few corners? What if I'm willing to play the game? What if I'm willing to do whatever it takes to be successful? What then? And he says, even then, the fastest runner, the greatest warrior, the most educated, the most skillful, they don't always end up on top either. There's a lack of predictability to it. And we don't like hearing that because we're used to a world that operates on cause and effect. We like a world that's predictable. We like a world where we can decide, if I do this, then I'll get that. If I'm willing to put in the work, I should be able to generate the result I'm looking for. If I'm willing to do what it takes, I should be a success. And the teacher says, look, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it works out that way, sometimes it doesn't. And it's maddeningly unpredictable. But we live in a world where we've got all kinds of sayings like the best things in life are free and the bigger they are, the harder they fall. We like sayings and we like things that tell us how the world works so that we can follow the rules, so we can figure out the patterns. And if we can figure out the patterns, then we can make things happen. We like the law of cause and effect because we can know what's going to happen. But the truth is, we live in a very unpredictable world. And sometimes we can't see things coming. And history shows us that it's always been that way in the world. If you look back to the Quarterly Review of 1825, this is what they put in print in 1825. What can be more palpably absurd than the prospect held out of locomotives traveling twice as fast as stagecoaches? Can you imagine a train that could move faster than a team of horses? Poppycock, right? Never going to happen. That's what they said in 1825. Or Dr. Alfred Velpeau in 1839, he said, the abolishment of pain in surgery is a chimera or an illusion, like it's impossible. This was 7 years before the advent of anesthesia, and he couldn't picture a world in which it wasn't going to be hugely painful to go through surgery. I've had 7 surgeries on my hip, 4 hip replacements. They peeled me open like a grape and sawed stuff off. I can't even imagine. I went through a little bit of pain, and by a little bit of pain, I mean a fair bit of pain, just after recovering. I can't imagine walking into surgery and biting down on a stick and saying, all right, go ahead. I am really glad there's anesthesia. Anybody who's ever had surgery, you're glad it exists. But this guy couldn't, it was only 7 years later that they came up with that, but he couldn't even picture a world where they might be able to come up with something to stop pain in surgery. Couldn't see it coming. Richard Vander Riet Woolley in 1943, he said, space travel is utter bilge. People going to outer space? That's crazy talk. Or Robert McNamara, he was the U.S. Secretary of Defense in 1963, and he said, the war in Vietnam is going well and will succeed. Sometimes people don't see what's coming. They can't foresee the future. They don't understand the developments that'll happen. They don't know where things will land, and sometimes they make predictions that are way off. And so in a world that's neither fair nor predictable, how do we just go ahead and eat our food with joy, drink our wine with a happy heart, live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God's given you under the sun? How do you do that? How do you just go ahead and be happy if things aren't fair and things aren't predictable and there's kind of not patterns that are locked in that you can follow the rules to try to get ahead? If it really doesn't work out that way, how do you go ahead and be satisfied in life and be happy and be joyful and be at peace in your relationships? And our world breeds that question because we crave control. We want to be in control of what happens to us. And when I'm good, I have expectations that everything will work out for me and that things will go the way that I want them to, that if I do the right things, if I'm a good person, I'll get a good result. If I'm good, I deserve to get rewarded, right? I deserve to be blessed. And so I walk around, and you walk around with those dangerous little words, those 3 dangerous little words that are probably more dangerous than any others in the history of humankind. I deserve better. I deserve better than I'm getting. I deserve better results. I deserve a better life than I'm getting. And the world should work out more fairly. It should be more predictable. I should be able to get results. And it's not right when I can't. It's not right when things don't work out that way. Because our world moves around in a world where I like the fact that when I flick on a light switch, the lights come on. And when I turn my tap in my kitchen or in the bathroom, boom, water. My family will tell you, I make the joke way too often, but sometimes I walk up to a light switch, it's getting a little dim outside, and so it's getting dim inside, and I flick on the light switch and I say, "Let there be light." And there's light. And I have control. I can create light. I did that. Just by flicking a switch. Just by closing a circuit. Just by tapping into electricity. It's magical. But the thing about running water and the thing about light switches is that they teach me that I get what I want instantly. As soon as I do the thing, I get the result. And we live in a world of all kinds of instant conveniences, and I get it right now as soon as I ask for it, as soon as I send for it, as soon as I click the button that says, overnight shipping. I get what I want when I want it, and it gives me the illusion that the world should work out for me and everything should go smoothly and I should always have instantly what I want as long as I do the right thing, as long as I choose the right product, as long as I kind of follow the rules of the universe, I should be able to make things happen. And I should be in control of my own destiny, and I should be able to get the right results. There should be rules that I can follow to get the right outcomes that I'm looking for. Or a reason that I get ahead or somebody else gets ahead, and I can look at it and say, oh yeah, well if I did that next time, I can make it happen. So why isn't it that way? And how do we live at peace with that? How do we even negotiate a world that's unpredictable and unfair and treats us unfairly and bad things happen to us even when we're trying really hard to get it right? How do we deal with that? And especially, how do we deal with that in such a way that we can live with joy and with happiness and contentment and peace in our relationships when there's so much turmoil, when things are out of control? Well, let's go back to that middle section. And this is a good point to explain again. Some of you have heard me say that in Scripture, in Israelite writings and teaching, it's often the case that, when we give an argument, we go, well, number one this, and number two that, and number three, and we always save the big one for the end. And boom, the last one's like the big one. And then we drop the mic, and the argument's over, and we win, right? And if you write an essay for school, you're kind of taught to do that. It's called the law of end stress. Like, you save your big one for last, and you build up towards it. And so the big message, the conclusion, the thing that wraps everything together is always at the end of our writing or our talking or our thinking. if we're, making an argument or a logical explanation. But in Israelite thought, they used what's called a chiasm often. And so it's a pattern like A-B-A or A-B-C-B-A. And so the two A's are the same, and the B is the one that's different in the middle, or the A-B is the same, and the B-A, the B's match, and the A's match, and the C in the middle. It's like a good sandwich, the best parts in the middle, right? And so a chiasm tells us that the message of the passage is not at the beginning or at the end, but that it's sandwiched in between that. And so when the teacher says to us, hey, the whole world's unfair, and then he gives his offering of advice, and then he comes back and says, hey, the whole world's unpredictable, like there's not a pattern here that you can follow to get the right results. He's pointing you towards the middle of the passage and what he said. And so his argument is, because it's unfair, because it's unpredictable, because the world is kind of chaotic and you can't always follow, good people don't always get ahead and bad people don't always get punished, and doing the right thing doesn't always get the right result, and doing the wrong thing doesn't always get the wrong result. He says, so go ahead, eat your food with joy, drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. So when we look back at this long passage, and then he says, live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you under the sun. The wife God gives you is the reward for all your earthly toil. Whatever you do, do well. For when you go to the grave, there will be no work or planning or knowledge or wisdom. You notice the difference here? In those when he starts off, he says the world isn't fair, and even people who do the right thing, they get the same result. Like destiny seems like it always works out, that good people don't always get ahead and bad people always don't get punished. And then he says it's unpredictable, and you can't even tell. It's not always the fastest runner. There's no pattern to it that you can follow that way. The world just kind of, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But his answer is, go ahead, eat your food with joy, drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. And then he says after, live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of your life that God has given you. And the wife God gives you is your reward for all your earthly toil. See, our world, we walk around with the idea that maybe if I do the right things, I could be in control. I can do what it takes to be successful. I can do what it takes to get the result that I want. If I put in the work, if I follow the pattern, if I use the rules to my advantage, I can make things happen. But the teacher says it's about what God approves of. It's what God wants. And that God is the one who's given us the days of our lives. He's the one that's in control of our days. And it's God who gives us a good spouse. That's our reward for all of our earthly toil. So he tells us that God's in control, and that very thing should be something that helps us to be at peace and to be happy and to be joyful and to be content in our relationships. That the way to contentment isn't to look for contentment or happiness. It's not trying to figure out the rules and game the system, even to game the system with God by religion. He says it's not about that. We don't manipulate God into giving us a good life, but it's about what God wants. And it's about God giving us our lives and God giving us our days and God at work in our relationships. And so he says, look, the goal isn't the happiness and the joy. The goal is the approval of God and the life that he gives us. But when we focus on God and when we are obedient to God, when we seek his approval or disapproval and ask him what he wants, then we're way more likely to be able to be content. So he says God's in control of the world, and it's his approval or disapproval of things that matters. But then if you look at the passage and you look at the other side and you say, well, that's what it says about God. What does it say about us? It says to us, go ahead, eat your food with joy, drink your wine with a happy heart, for God approves of this. Like you have a choice to eat your food with joy, to drink your wine with a happy heart. Wear fine clothes with a splash of cologne. Like live your life. Get out there and enjoy it. And he says you can actually choose to do that if you're seeking God's approval. And then he says, live happily with the woman you love through all the meaningless days of life that God has given you. Like God's given you a life, and you can choose to live happily with your spouse. You can get along with them. You can be peaceable with them. You can have a healthy relationship with them. And that's possible because you've surrendered the idea of control. And you've stopped trying to game the system, even trying to game God into giving you what you want. You're not playing him for what you get out of it, but you're seeking his approval and you're seeking his will. And then you can actually go around and make a decision to live joyfully and happily. And you can enjoy your relationships and you can enjoy the things that he's blessed you with, but without the illusion that you're in control and can make things happen a certain way. And he says it gives you so much peace that whatever you do well. Like enter into the things that you're doing. Do them well. Don't do them well so that you can get what you want, but just do them well because they're things that are part of your life. Like just enter into life and try to live well. For when you go to the grave, he says, there's going to be no work, and there's going to be no planning and knowledge and wisdom, that all those things will be over, and you control whether you work hard and whether you live well. You control whether you live peaceably with your spouse and with the people around you in relationship, and you control whether you enjoy the things you have or whether you're always obsessed with getting the things that you want. And so the heart of the matter for the teacher is to say, look, you can go about your life scrambling like everybody else to try to figure out how to get what you want. And you won't end up happy, and you won't end up joyful, and you won't end up truly content. But if you want the deep contentment, the deep joy, the abiding true happiness, then you seek God's approval. And you realize that he's God and you're not. And then you can walk around your world accepting the things that he's given you as good gifts. And the people he's brought into your life as a good gift. And that relationship can grow and develop. And you can live with the contentment of being the person that he's made you to be rather than seeking for what you want and trying to get him to give it to you.